So, your son's girlfriend is from a single-parent household, huh? I bet she's a high school dropout working as a janitor at the hospital. Probably one of those bottom feeders who'd do anything to get close to a doctor. How did she manage to trick our son?
These harsh words came from Jason's father during our first meeting to discuss our children's engagement. I bit my lip, trying to contain my anger. I had raised Emily on my own since Michael's death, working tirelessly to ensure she had every opportunity in life. We had both worked hard to avoid the stigma often associated with single-parent families. There was absolutely no reason for this man, whom we had just met, to speak to us this way. But the alcohol seemed to fuel his confidence, and he continued his tirade.
I won't allow this marriage. A poor girl from a broken home could never be a suitable match for our family. I'll find a woman worthy of our social standing. We come from a long line of distinguished physicians. To be associated with someone of such low breeding would bring shame upon our family for generations to come. This meeting is over. Leave now.
I couldn't bear to listen any longer. With trembling hands, I stood up, ready to reveal the truth. As I did, Jason's father's face turned ashen. My name is Sarah Thompson, and I'm 55 years old. My mother, a dedicated nurse, raised me single-handedly while excelling in her career. Inspired by her example, I too became a nurse. While working at a prestigious university in Boston, I met Michael, a talented young doctor. Unlike many physicians, Michael was humble and kind-hearted. His medical skills were exceptional, but his gentle nature often led us nurses to lovingly push him to be more assertive. Michael and I fell in love, married, and a few years later, he left the university hospital to start his own practice. Around the same time, I became pregnant with our daughter, Emily. At Michael's request, I took a break from nursing to focus on raising Emily. As she grew older and more independent, I began helping out at Michael's clinic. His compassionate approach to medicine made the clinic popular, and we were soon overwhelmed with patients. One day, little Emily announced, "When I grow up, I want to be a doctor just like Daddy." Her eyes sparkled as she shared her dream. While part of me had hoped she'd follow in my footsteps as a nurse, I knew Emily had always been a daddy's girl. Emily was as intelligent as her father, so becoming a doctor seemed entirely possible for her. Michael was overjoyed at the prospect of working alongside his daughter someday. Life was busy, but fulfilling, and I felt truly happy. But, as the saying goes, when things seem too good to be true, they usually are. During his time at the university hospital, Michael had undergone surgery for a brain tumor. We thought he had fully recovered, but about 10 years after opening his practice, his health began to decline. I urged him to get checked, but Michael, ever the dedicated doctor, prioritized his patients over his own well-being. One day, after finishing with a patient, Michael suddenly collapsed. We rushed him to the hospital, but he fell into a coma. Despite the doctor's best efforts and our fervent prayers, Michael passed away without ever regaining consciousness. Losing Michael, the pillar of our family and Emily's role model, left us in shock. After the whirlwind of the funeral, our home felt empty and devoid of light. We had no choice but to close the clinic. Emily was only in middle school, so I reached out to my former colleagues and managed to return to my old position at the university hospital. I knew being a single working mother would be challenging. I had heard stories from single mom coworkers in the past. Fortunately, the hospital staff, remembering Michael fondly, were incredibly supportive of my situation. Former colleagues, both doctors and nurses, offered words of encouragement.
Sarah, you can head home now. We've got everything covered here.
But I still have.
Don't worry about it. You'd better hurry or Emily will scold you for being late again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Their kindness, no doubt partially due to Michael's lasting impact, helped me stay positive. As I settled back into work, I began taking on night shifts for the extra pay. My sleep schedule became erratic, and I often felt more exhausted than I had in my younger years. But what kept me going was my desire to help Emily achieve her dream. Perhaps sensing my struggles, Emily began helping out more around the house. She always greeted me with a smile and words of gratitude. Even during the challenging teenage years, she remained a considerate child. Every night, I would report to Michael's photo in our family altar. Darling, Emily has grown into such a wonderful young woman. When it came time for high school entrance exams, Emily was accepted into a well-regarded public school in our area. Given her abilities, she could have aimed for more prestigious private schools, so I asked her about her choice. The private schools are far away, and I'm not sure I'd fit in with their culture. Plus, I have friends at the local school, she replied, uncharacteristically vague. It was around this time that Emily stopped talking about becoming a doctor. When I asked about her plans after high school, she would change the subject. Just before her senior year, Emily finally opened up to me. Mom, I've been thinking, maybe I should start working after graduation. What are you talking about? What about college? What about your dream of becoming a doctor? But, Mom, medical school is so expensive. It was true that medical school tuition was significantly higher than that of regular universities. Emily, always considerate, was likely worried about our financial situation as a single-income household. Oh, don't worry about that, sweetheart. Your father left us some savings, and more importantly, he was overjoyed when he learned of your dream to become a doctor. He would be heartbroken if you gave up on that dream. If Emily had found a new passion, that would be one thing, but I couldn't let her give up on her aspirations due to financial concerns. It would be a disservice to Michael's memory. As a parent, I wanted Emily to follow her heart and pursue her chosen path. Emily, I don't want you to give up. If your father were here, I'm sure he'd say the same thing. My earnest plea seemed to have an effect. Emily smiled and said, Okay, Mom, I'll do my best with my college prep. From that moment on, Emily threw herself into her studies with renewed vigor. Once she set her mind to something, there was no stopping her. A year later, Emily was accepted into medical school at Harvard University. Emily worked diligently throughout medical school, obtained her license, and completed her 2-year residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. Finally, she achieved her dream of becoming a fully fledged doctor. That spring, we visited Michael's grave together to share the news. Dad, I did it. I became a doctor just like I promised. I wish we could work together, but... Emily's voice trailed off as she addressed the headstone under the blooming cherry blossoms. Your father would be so proud of you, Emily, I said, my voice thick with emotion. When Michael passed away, Emily was still in middle school. I had worried about how losing her father at such a sensitive age would affect her, but she had persevered, worked incredibly hard, and achieved her dream. If Michael were here, he would undoubtedly be beaming with pride. As we stood there, lost in our thoughts, Emily suddenly turned to me with a mischievous grin. Hey, Mom, now that your daughter has spread her wings, don't you think it's time for you to live your own life a little? What on earth are you talking about? I exclaimed, taken aback by her sudden question. We were having dinner at a local diner after visiting the cemetery when Emily sprung this on me. After graduating from medical school, Emily had moved into her own apartment. Although my daughter was now independent, I continued working at the hospital. I enjoyed my job, felt valued by my colleagues, and had no plans to retire anytime soon. When I expressed this to Emily, she shook her head. "That's not what I meant, Mom. You're still young. What about remarrying? I bet there's a nice guy at the hospital, right?" What are you saying? Don't tease your mother like that. I stammered, flustered by her suggestion. It was true that there was a man at the hospital I was close to, but our relationship was purely professional. The thought of romance at my age seemed... Emily was thriving in her career as a doctor. She even spent some time working abroad, but always made sure to keep in touch. She shared stories of her early days as a doctor, dealing with difficult patients, coping with the loss of those she couldn't save, and finding the strength to persevere. Emily's resilience was remarkable. She told me that in tough times she would think of her father and find the courage to keep going. It wasn't just work she shared with me. Emily mentioned she was seeing someone, a fellow doctor she had met during her residency. They had grown close while confiding in each other about the challenges of being new doctors. Although they were now in a long-distance relationship, Emily spoke about him with such warmth that I could tell things were going well. I suspected marriage might be on the horizon for them. However, when Emily mentioned that her boyfriend's last name was Baker and that his father was also a doctor, I felt a twinge of concern. I knew a Dr. Baker at the hospital, and he had quite a negative reputation. But Baker isn't an uncommon name, so I tried to dismiss it as a coincidence. Emily seemed happy, and I didn't want to cast a shadow on her joy. Sure enough, not long after, Emily called with the exciting news that her boyfriend had proposed. She wanted to arrange a formal meeting between both families. To be honest, I had some news of my own to share with Emily, but I decided to focus on celebrating her engagement first. The day of the family meeting arrived, and we gathered at an upscale restaurant in Boston. Barely had the introductions been made when Emily's future father-in-law launched into a self-aggrandizing monologue.
Our family, you see, comes from a long line of distinguished physicians. We're not talking about run-of-the-mill general practitioners here. My grandfather, my father, and myself, we've all graduated from Ivy League schools and hold professorships at top universities. My son is destined to follow the same path. He droned on and on about the family's accomplishments and social standing. His wife remained largely silent, merely nodding along, seemingly in full agreement with her husband's boasting. At first, I tried to respond politely, but inwardly, I was growing tired of his endless self-promotion. When he declared, "We elites are busy even on our days off. I'm only here today because my son insisted," I couldn't help but let my exasperation show on my face. As it turned out, Dr. Baker and I worked at the same hospital. When Emily had first mentioned her boyfriend's last name, I had hoped it was just a coincidence, but unfortunately, it was indeed the same Dr. Baker I knew of. Dr. Baker was a professor in the internal medicine department, while I was a nurse in the surgery ward. Although we had never directly interacted, his poor reputation was well known among the nursing staff. However, I never imagined he would be this insufferable in person. "We're truly grateful that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to meet with us," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I wondered if he would pick up on it. Dr. Baker then turned his scrutinizing gaze onto me and said, "I hear your husband was also a doctor, however, passing away so young. It makes me question his self-care skills and, frankly, his competence as a physician. And you, as his wife, Didn't you notice anything was wrong? It seems your attentiveness as a spouse was lacking.
His words struck a nerve. Who did he think he was to speak about Michael like that?
Dad, that's completely out of line.
Jason, Emily's fiancé, interjected, trying to rein in his father. Unlike his rude and condescending father, Jason seemed to be a sincere and kind young man. That, at least, was a relief.
Be quiet, son. I need to know if this woman is suitable as an in-law. Marriage isn't just about the couple, it's about joining two families. As a parent, I have every right to be concerned,
Dr. Baker said, a smug smile playing on his lips. His expression made it clear that he looked down on us completely.
So, the girl my son brought home is from a single-parent household, eh? I suppose that means you're a high school dropout? I heard you work at the hospital. What are you, a cleaning lady? One of those bottom feeders who do anything to get close to a doctor and snag a wealthy husband? How did you manage to trick my son?
Throughout my years as a single mother, I had encountered both support and derision. Some people assumed that working full-time meant I couldn't properly raise my child. Others predicted Emily would end up as a delinquent. I'd even been told such things to my face before. Emily and I had worked tirelessly to prove them wrong, to show that a child from a single-parent home could succeed and thrive. There was absolutely no reason for this man, whom we had just met, to speak to us so disparagingly.
Dad, please, just stop talking,
Jason pleaded, but the alcohol seemed to have loosened Dr. Baker's tongue, and he showed no signs of stopping.
I won't allow this marriage. A poor girl from a broken home could never be a suitable match for our family. I'll find a woman worthy of our social standing. We come from a long line of distinguished physicians. To be associated with someone of such low breeding would bring shame upon our family for generations to come. This meeting is over. Leave now.
I couldn't bear to listen any longer. With trembling hands, I stood up, ready to reveal the truth. But before I could speak, Emily rose from her seat. She wore a smile, but her eyes were cold with anger. Usually, Emily was calm and patient, especially since losing her father. However, if someone insulted her parents, her temper would flare. I feared that if Emily lashed out now, it might create tension in her relationship with Jason. To prevent this, I stood up and placed a calming hand on her shoulder. My daughter is a doctor, I simply stated. Dr. Baker's jaw dropped.
What? You must be lying. A product of a single-parent home, amounting to anything?
Jason quickly stepped in to support us.
Dad, Emily is an even more skilled surgeon than I am. She's been incredibly dedicated to her research, especially in early detection of the disease that took her father's life. Her passion and expertise led her to continue her studies in America, where she's now recognized as a brilliant neurosurgeon.
I listened to Jason's impassioned speech with a sense of pride. Emily hadn't shared all the details of her accomplishments with me, but hearing how respected she was in her field filled my heart with joy. Emily, who had been bristling with quiet anger moments ago, now looked embarrassed by Jason's praise. Dr. Baker seemed to deflate a little, but he wasn't ready to give up entirely.
I see. Well, even if your daughter has made something of herself, the fact remains that she comes from a broken home. Surely you understand. You live in different worlds. Eventually, you'll find you have nothing in common. Son, I'm only thinking of your future.
The bluster was gone from his voice, but it was clear he still couldn't accept Emily. At this point, I decided it was time to play my trump card. I signaled to someone I had asked to wait nearby. You keep harping on about us being a single-parent family, I said. But I should inform you that I'm getting remarried soon, so we won't be a single-parent household anymore. As I spoke, a distinguished-looking man, slightly older than me, entered the room. Dr. Baker's face drained of color.
Director Harris, why are you here?
The man who had just joined us was Dr. Richard Harris, the director of the university hospital where I worked, and Dr. Baker's superior. Emily's eyes lit up in recognition. "Dr. Harris, it's been a while." Dr. Harris smiled warmly at Emily.
It certainly has, Emily. I've been hearing great things about you.
Dr. Harris was a senior colleague of my late husband and had been close to our family even before Michael and I were married. He used to visit our home to play with Emily when she was little. Now, as the hospital director, he had been incredibly supportive of me when I returned to work after Michael's passing. When Emily had once asked me if there was a nice guy at the hospital, Dr. Harris was the first person who came to mind. Dr. Harris had lost his wife years ago and had no children of his own. He had always treated Emily like his own daughter. He had been pursuing me for some time, but I hadn't been ready to open my heart again. However, with Emily's engagement, I finally felt ready to accept his proposal. I had originally planned to introduce him to Emily after this meeting, but I decided the timing was right to reveal our relationship now. "I hadn't planned to announce this until after your introductions were complete," I said, addressing everyone in the room. "But given the circumstances, I think it's appropriate to share now. Dr. Harris and I are engaged to be married." The room fell silent. Dr. Baker's mouth hung open in shock, while his wife looked utterly bewildered. After a moment, Dr. Baker found his voice.
Well, to think you'll be related to the hospital director. What a joyous occasion indeed. Don't you agree, dear?
"Oh, yes, of course. How wonderful." His wife chimed in, her laughter sounding forced and uncomfortable. It was almost comical how quickly they changed their tune. Jason looked at his parents with a mixture of embarrassment and disappointment. Now it was my turn to speak my mind. "I'm afraid we can't be entirely celebratory about this situation. While Jason seems to be a wonderful match for Emily, I have some concerns about his parents."
What are you saying?
Dr. Baker sputtered, his face reddening. I went on to reveal the rumors I had heard about Dr. Baker's unethical practices at the hospital. Despite his position as professor of internal medicine, he was known for stealing credit for his subordinates' research, fabricating mistakes to eliminate rivals, and bullying young doctors and nurses. But what angered me most was his earlier comment about my late husband. "You said you questioned my husband's competence as a doctor. How dare you?" Dr. Baker tried to backpedal.
"No, that was just a figure of speech."
At this point, Dr. Harris interjected, his voice tight with anger.
"Michael was one of the most promising associate professors at our hospital. He was even being considered for a full professorship before he decided to leave due to health concerns following his brain surgery. To insult him is unforgivable."
Dr. Baker seemed to shrink under Dr. Harris's stern gaze, looking very much like a scolded schoolboy. Dr. Harris turned to Emily.
"By the way, Emily, have you considered my offer? The one I emailed you about recently?"
Emily had been working in America until recently, but had returned to Boston for her marriage. As a highly skilled neurosurgeon, she had received offers from several hospitals. However, as the director of her alma mater, Dr. Harris was eager to have her return to the university hospital. Dr. Baker, sensing an opportunity to ingratiate himself, piped up.
"Oh, what a wonderful connection this would be!"
It seemed he had suddenly decided to approve of the marriage. However, Emily's expression had clouded over. "I'm sorry, Dr. Harris, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline your offer to return to the university hospital," Emily said firmly. Dr. Harris looked surprised.
May I ask why?
Emily fixed Dr. Baker with a steely glare. My father taught me that a doctor must be compassionate towards all patients, regardless of their background. He said that every life is equally precious, and illness doesn't discriminate based on social status. I will never forget the time I spent with my father, and I have the utmost respect for my mother, who raised me so well after his passing. I cannot work at a hospital where there is a professor who would insult my parents like this. Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully.
I see. Well, I'm aware of Dr. Baker's reputation, and I assure you that appropriate action will be taken soon. Our hospital needs talented physicians like you, Dr. Thompson.
Dr. Baker's face paled.
What? You can't possibly. This little girl, how dare she? Dr. Baker, I suggest you remain silent.
Dr. Harris cut him off sharply.
You'll be informed of your disciplinary measures in due course.
Dr. Baker's expression was one of utter despair. True to his word, Dr. Harris took swift action. The following month, disciplinary measures were imposed on Dr. Baker. He was demoted, had his salary reduced, and was transferred to a remote medical care center for the elderly. While he retained the title of director at the new facility, it was essentially a position without any real authority. Perhaps it was too much for his pride to bear, given how he had boasted about his family's long line of distinguished physicians and his position as a university hospital professor. Whatever the reason, Dr. Baker resigned from his new position within 6 months. Meanwhile, Emily and Jason's wedding went ahead as planned. Emily accepted Dr. Harris's offer and returned to work at the university hospital. Mom, why don't you and Dr. Harris have a double wedding with us? Emily suggested, but I declined. At our age, a big ceremony felt a bit embarrassing. We did register our marriage, but we decided against a lavish wedding. Once Emily and Jason were settled, we planned to have a small party with close friends and family to celebrate. Emily and Jason quickly became known as the hospital's power couple, both respected for their skills and compassion. As a parent, I felt relieved knowing that my daughter had found happiness in both her marriage and her career. And I, too, had found a wonderful partner later in life. We were enjoying peaceful, contented days together. This experience taught me once again that you should never judge someone based on their background or family situation. Everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves. To this day, I continue to live my life with pride, grateful for the journey that brought me here and the people who supported me along the way. As I watch Emily follow in her father's footsteps, making a difference in patients' lives every day, I can't help but think that Michael is watching over us, beaming with pride. Our story is a testament to the fact that with love, determination, and support, any family can thrive and succeed, regardless of its structure.